In this episode, we attempt to reconstruct the final hours of Yu Menglong's life using available video and audio materials, together with an alleged autopsy report. Before proceeding, we will first assess the credibility of the circulated autopsy report. Viewers who prefer to focus directly on the reconstruction of events may skip this section and jump to the timeline analysis at 9:30. The circulated autopsy report indicates that the victim, a male whose name was redacted, was 37 years old. The body was examined under refrigerated conditions at the Beijing Shengtang Forensic Center, with the examination dated September 14, 2025, and commissioned by the Beijing Chaoyang District Jiangtai Police Station. The body showed normal development, standing 181 cm tall, with average nutrition, light yellow skin, and no enlarged superficial lymph nodes. Post-mortem signs included dark red liver mortis on the occiput, neck, back, sacral region, and the lower limbs non-compressed areas, with pressure failing to blanch the discoloration. The abdomen displayed early post-mortem greenish discoloration, livor green. The head examination noted hair approximately 12 cm long on the crown, black, thick, and shiny, with scalp lacerations. Both eyelids and conjunctiva were pale, corneas opaque, and pupils unreactive. Blood was present in both external ears and ear canals. A nasal bone fracture was accompanied by blood in the nasal cavity. A 3 cm mucosal laceration on the inner side of the lower right lip corresponded to an irregular transverse 7.5 cm laceration on the outer surface. Nearly all teeth were missing, leaving only the right lower first premolar. Further findings included chest injuries, bilateral hemothorax, multiple fractures on the left ribs, significant pericardial effusion, liver contusions, and lacerations in the genital area. The reported cause of death was sudden cessation of respiration and heartbeat. The examination process was reportedly conducted in strict accordance with the public security industry standards of the People's Republic of China and relevant forensic operational guidelines from Eastern and Western Medical University. The external body examination documented injuries to the head, face, oral cavity, chest, abdomen, and limbs, emphasizing both severity and distribution. However, several inconsistencies remain. The institutional name and procedural guideline numbering are problematic. The report repeatedly cites the Eastern and Western Medical University Forensic Center and a guideline number consisting of letters and numbers such as NYSJ, yet no public record exists for this institution. Additionally, this code format does not match standard forensic procedural guidelines, which typically include clear version numbers or revision details. The report also describes extreme injuries that would be difficult to produce solely from a fall, such as the near-total loss of teeth and genital laceration. Furthermore, the presentation is incomplete and inconsistent. Normally, massive tooth loss would be accompanied by detailed descriptions of gum and oral cavity damage, yet the original images show interruptions at this point, suggesting deliberate omission. By concentrating these injuries, the report dramatizes the victim's ordeal. While this aids reader comprehension of severity, it also increases the likelihood of subjective narrative influence. Some informal text, such as "this long string of legal provisions" and "kill me then" is present, inconsistent with formal autopsy terminology, indicating the circulated images are likely a secondary transcription or compilation rather than the original report screenshot. Several explanations could account for these irregularities. If the source was an internal leak, the leaker may have deliberately fabricated or obscured details, e.g., institution name or guideline numbers, for safety. During transcription and circulation, text or symbols may have been reorganized. The report may also have been narrativized, combining different sections and leaving interruptions at key points. For example, the dental injuries likely would have been followed by more detailed oral injury description, omitted possibly due to sensitivity. It should be emphasized that while these doubts suggest the screenshot may not be from the original autopsy report, they do not automatically prove that the injuries themselves are fictitious. More likely, the circulated version represents a transcription, compilation, or partially processed version, rather than an unaltered original file. Shortly after the circulation of the above autopsy report, hereafter referred to as Report 1, online debunking emerged, claiming it was forged and presenting a purported 2012 autopsy report, hereafter Report 2, as evidence that Report 1 had been modified from an older case. Report 2 is said to be the Eastern and Western Medical University Forensic Center Forensic Pathology Opinion, 2012, commissioned by Wu Dongren and Ganzhou Renyi Hospital, with the decedent named Wu Yuyuan, male, 43 years old, whose cause of death was listed as complications from chest and abdominal injuries following a traffic accident. Rather than reproduce the full text, a table was prepared comparing the two reports. However, Report 2 contains even more notable inconsistencies. First, the institution name and procedural guideline number are identical to those in Report 1, despite there being no public record of such an institution. If Report 2 were genuinely an older case, it should not share the same fictitious institution as Report 1. This direct duplication is a major red flag and makes the authenticity of Report 2 highly suspect. Second, the causes of death and injuries in Report 2 closely resemble those in Report 1, including internal organ damage, descriptions of livor mortis and post-mortem green, and inferred time of death. The only differences are the names, dates, and locations. Claims that Report 1 copied Report 2 ignore that the reverse is also possible. Based solely on the text, it is impossible to determine which preceded the other. Report 2 attempts to attribute all injuries to a traffic accident, but inconsistencies remain. Medically, high-velocity blunt trauma from traffic accidents and high-altitude falls can appear similar. Thus, if someone sought to fabricate an old case to counter the fall theory, substituting a traffic accident as the cause is understandable. However, in doing so, Report 2 omits certain injuries from Report 1 that are difficult to explain via a traffic accident, simplifying the narrative. Overall, comparing Report 1's level of detail, dramatic descriptions, and timeline logic, Report 2 appears more like a deliberate cover-up than a genuine record. While Report 1 contains exaggerations and informal language, its details are complete, the timeline reasonable, and injury logic reconstructible. The main concerns are the fictitious institution and narrative stylization. In contrast, Report 2 copies the institution and procedural guideline from an already fictitious source and uses a traffic accident to cover fall injuries while omitting unexplained injuries, indicating a clear intent to conceal information. Consequently, the credibility of Report 2 is far lower than that of Report 1. The timing and method of Report 2's circulation are also significant, considering prior leaks of Yu Menglong's screams and the authorities' attempts to redirect public attention through narratives such as the crying delivery worker, combined with the CCP's long-term manipulation of mass online forces, both inside and outside the firewall. It is reasonable to infer that once highly indicative information from Report 1 was leaked, authorities likely acted to intervene in public opinion and diminish its impact. Having assessed the autopsy report's credibility, we can now combine video and audio evidence to gradually reconstruct the approximate final hours of Yu Menglong's life. Phase 1. Hanging by the feet, outside the apartment window. The first stage concerns the period when Yu Menglong was grabbed by the feet and hung upside down outside the apartment window. Based on weather data, residential lighting, and the quietness of the environment, this likely occurred after midnight on September 10th. No footage confirming police presence at that time has surfaced. An earlier video shows a police car with two individuals appearing to be officers, advising residents holding umbrellas to return home. Based on weather data, that video was likely taken before midnight, around 11 p.m. Whether police remained afterward is unknown. Earlier periods of heavy police presence are believed to have occurred at a different time. Now, one question arises: why hang him upside down? Dialogues allegedly recorded during his transfer to Sunshine Upper East, such as "open his abdomen" and someone shouting "spit it out" indoors, suggest the perpetrators were attempting to force him to vomit a previously swallowed USB drive. This action demonstrates a cognitive fallacy. The assailants believed hanging him upside down would induce vomiting, but in reality, it primarily caused severe psychological stress and discomfort from blood reflux. At this point, his consciousness remained clear. He cried loudly, speaking clearly, indicating his mouth and teeth had not yet been severely damaged. The numerous scratches found outside the window likely occurred during this period. The duration of hanging is unknown, but audio suggests it persisted for some time. Phase 2. Fall from the 5th floor. In the second phase, the perpetrators released Yu Menglong, resulting in a fall from the 5th floor. Falling head first, he likely struck his head first and then rolled forward. The initial impact likely concentrated on the head and face, causing nasal bone fractures, scalp lacerations, and lip tears. Subsequent chest and upper abdomen impact may have caused hemothorax and liver contusions. While a 5th floor fall could cause severe internal injuries, it might not have been immediately fatal, and a fall alone would not account for nearly all teeth being missing except a single premolar. This tooth loss likely occurred during subsequent torture. Phase 3. Continued violence after returning to the apartment. A video clip filmed through a peephole appears to capture the early moments of this phase, a group escorting him from the elevator back to the apartment. Though the footage is blurry, he can be heard crying, while Song Yiren appears to be filming behind them. The sound of his cries suggests possible lung damage, consistent with injuries sustained in a fall. Upon returning to the apartment, Yu Menglong was subjected to sustained violence. Based on the resulting injuries, this period may have lasted 1 to 2 hours or longer. During this time, his teeth were removed, and his speech gradually became slurred, yet he could still be heard pleading for help. "Save me, I was wrong," indicating that he remained conscious and his life was in danger. Next, we will play a short audio clip that constitutes crucial evidence of what occurred. It was precisely this audio that renewed attention to the previously circulated autopsy report and ultimately became the starting point for this video. The content may be distressing. Please fast forward about 15 seconds if you prefer. Later in this phase, non-standard abdominal procedures may have occurred. If so, trauma, bleeding, and possible infection or shock resulting from these procedures were likely critical factors in his death, probably occurring on the morning of September 10th. Phase 4. Time between death and scene fabrication. The fourth phase covers the interval from death to the fabrication of the scene. Based on the autopsy report, describing livor mortis, the body likely rested face up for over 12 hours. Post-mortem green discoloration on the abdomen suggests death occurred 12 to 24 hours prior. Corneal clouding and unreactive pupils further indicate an extended post-mortem interval. Considering that the body was refrigerated, which slows decomposition, if refrigeration began on the morning of September 11th, death likely occurred more than 24 hours earlier, most likely on the morning of September 10th. Phase 5. Fabricated scene and body discovery. The last stage involves the fabricated scene and body discovery. The body was found face down, while the livor mortis pattern suggests a prolonged supine position, indicating post-mortem movement or repositioning. The clothing did not match the night of the fall, further suggesting human intervention. Blood under the head was noted at the scene, but this does not imply vitality. Residual blood can leak from the mouth, nose, ears, or head wounds when moved, flipped, or compressed. Hemothorax or pulmonary contusions can also cause blood to flow through the airways onto the ground in a prone position. Therefore, the presence of blood more likely reflects post-mortem handling rather than ongoing life signs. From a fatal mechanism perspective, the initial fall likely caused severe head and chest blunt trauma, including hemothorax and liver contusions, but may not have been immediately lethal. The subsequent apartment torture, including conscious tooth extraction, indicates continued suffering with active pleas for help. Considering bandaging on the abdomen in post-mortem photos, the abdominal procedure was likely a direct cause of death. The fall, while causing serious injury, may not have been the sole lethal factor. There are also rumors suggesting that the victim may have been taken to a hospital in the early hours of September 11th. According to these accounts, someone later returned to the scene, searched through a trash can, and removed a plastic bottle. If a hospital transfer did occur, two possibilities emerge when considered alongside the estimated time of death. First possibility, the victim had already gone into cardiac arrest during a non-standard procedure inside the apartment. In this scenario, the perpetrators may have retrieved the USB and performed basic bandaging before sending him to the hospital, but by that point, it would already have been too late. If true, such a transfer would most likely have taken place on the morning of September 10th. Second possibility, the hospital transfer occurred in the early hours of the 11th as a deliberate cover operation, for instance, to create a medical record suggesting a drug overdose or another sudden cause of death. This plan may later have been abandoned, and the body subsequently returned to stage the fall from building scene. The second explanation appears more plausible. It aligns with the timeline and the behavior of the perpetrators, whereas the first scenario would require them to have suddenly developed a sense of conscience, which seems highly unlikely. Evidence from the scene also suggests that by the time the body may have been taken to a hospital, Yu Menglong was most likely no longer alive. One detail warrants particular attention. Reports claim that a woman later returned to the scene and searched through a trash can. If accurate, this may indicate that there was an initial attempt to frame the death as a drug overdose. When that plan was abandoned, items potentially leaving forensic traces had to be retrieved. The reasoning for abandoning such a plan may be straightforward. Officially attributing the death to a drug overdose would have required disclosure of additional autopsy data. The more information became public, the greater the risk that further inconsistencies or problematic details would emerge. Full timing analysis. Based on the only post-fall photograph, the lighting appears natural. In the video showing him being taken back to the apartment, the lighting also appears consistent with daylight, suggesting that the return to the apartment occurred during the early morning hours. The period during which Yu Menglong was hung upside down likely extended just past midnight. Considering the physical effort required by the perpetrators to maintain the hanging, it is estimated that he fell around 1 a.m. and almost certainly no later than 2 a.m. This timing implies that he may have lain in the flower bed for several hours, unattended. The fall was therefore unlikely to have been accidental. Rather, it appears intentional and designed to inflict lethal harm. The prolonged lack of medical attention would have ensured that, even if the fall was not immediately fatal, he would likely die from blood loss or other complications. The assailants who later checked on him were likely assessing whether he still had vital signs. Once they confirmed that he was still alive, they brought him back upstairs. So when did they return to check? Based on historical data regarding sunrise times in Beijing, and taking into account the deliberate delay that would ensure the victim remained unattended after the fall, as well as the perpetrator's likely hesitation or fear in the face of a potential fatality, it seems most plausible that they chose to check around daybreak. However, in order to avoid public scrutiny, they would likely not have waited long after sunrise. The fact that multiple individuals appear in the peephole footage aligns with this hypothesis. On one hand, their presence may have served to bolster their collective courage. On the other, if the victim had indeed died, they would have needed several people to carry the body back upstairs, presumably to retrieve the USB drive and stage the scene. In summary, it is highly probable that the time Yu Menglong was brought back into the apartment fell between 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. During those critical hours, did anyone attempt to intervene or provide aid, only to be blocked? Were police officers present at the scene? Did the police assist the perpetrators? Were gunshots truly heard that night, and were they connected to this incident? These questions remain to be investigated in the future. The perpetrator's actions both before and after the fall demonstrate clear intent to kill. During the earlier transfer from another crime scene to Sunshine Upper East, they reportedly stated, "He won't die," suggesting that at that moment there may not yet have been an immediate intention to kill. The turning point likely occurred later, perhaps not precisely at the moment of his cries during the hanging, but that episode appears to have become the last straw that prompted lethal measures. After hearing his cries, they ultimately threw him from the building, fearing that he might expose more secrets. The subsequent brutality, including sustained physical violence, tooth extraction, and other forms of abuse, served multiple purposes. Diluting individual responsibility among the perpetrators and maximizing Yu Menglong's suffering and inducing pleas for mercy before his death. His pleas for mercy were recorded and may have been leaked to industry peers, almost certainly as a means of intimidation. The perpetrators may have sought such pleas from him earlier, but had never succeeded until then. This pattern of abuse illustrates the extreme asymmetry of power. The perpetrators possessed political backing, access to coercive force, and the ability to influence enforcers, while the victim was isolated and powerless. Physical torture, such as tooth extraction, was not only a method of inflicting pain, but also a mechanism intended to compel submission, completing a ritualized punishment cycle. Genital injury may have been deliberate retribution for refusal to comply with unspoken rules, serving both physical and symbolic purposes: humiliation, reinforcement of control, and intensification of fear. What emerges from this reconstruction is not simply an isolated act of violence. The pattern of coercion, humiliation, and intimidation closely mirrors methods long embedded in totalitarian political culture. Logically, this case bears striking resemblance to political persecution during Mao-era campaigns: Yan'an rectification, land reform, suppression of counter-revolutionaries, the anti-rightist campaign, and the Cultural Revolution. In those campaigns, individuals labeled as enemies were stripped of any opportunity to defend themselves. Refusal to admit wrongdoing resulted in sustained psychological and physical punishment, while admission of fault reinforced the perpetrator's perceived rightness and signaled absolute obedience to authority. In the Yu Menglong case, the sustained violence was not merely physical, it was a deliberate demonstration of authority and psychological domination. Recordings of his pleas suggest intentional dissemination aimed at intimidating industry peers. In totalitarian systems, violence functions as a political language. Public punishment and forced confessions do more than punish an individual. They broadcast power, erode will, and signal that survival depends on absolute compliance. The perpetrators, themselves insiders, had internalized this logic, treating the victim as inherently deserving punishment for his disobedience. Their objectives mirrored those of authority: eliminate perceived risks, intimidate peers, and assert dominance. In this way, Yu Menglong was reduced from a human being to an instrument, a symbol of the system's reach. Despite global outrage following Yu Menglong's death and widespread domestic calls for a criminal investigation, the perpetrators appeared shielded by the state. Their careers continued without interruption, with film releases, festival appearances, and official performances proceeding as scheduled, though they faced fierce public boycott. This demonstrates that they fully embodied the requirements of the totalitarian machine's cogs: loyalty to power, obedience to orders, and execution of directives, with disregard for humanity and innocent life. Within a totalitarian system, violence functions not merely as punishment, but as a political language. It sends a clear message to an entire industry and to society at large. Survival depends entirely on submission. Ultimately, this case illustrates not only individual cruelty, but a totalitarian exercise of unrestrained power. Yu Menglong's final hours, hanging, falling, torture, post-mortem manipulation, and years of prior surveillance and abuse, reveal complete domination over life, institutionalized fear, and systematic moral erosion. Political scholars like Rudolf Rummel have noted that totalitarian regimes systematically weaponize fear and death in predictable, ideologically driven ways. Holocaust survivor and historian Primo Levi observed that the first victims in Nazi concentration camps were often the best individuals, those who retained conscience, reason, and compassion, and therefore refused to participate in the perpetrators' atrocities. Yu Menglong, until his last breath, harmed no one. Yet his kindness, talent, and alignment with state-approved patriotism and charitable deeds offered him no protection from totalitarian enforcers. In such systems, morality itself can be perceived as a threat, while obedience becomes the ultimate form of morality demanded by those in power. Hannah Arendt's analysis of totalitarian regimes highlights a dual structure of rule: public legality for some, and absolute extrajudicial control for others. Under Xi Jinping's China, unconditional compliance with superiors is paramount. Within the entertainment industry, due to its high visibility, propaganda function, and proximity to the CCP's power center, these expectations have been intensified exponentially, and punishment for disobedience has grown far more severe. By refusing to submit, Yu Menglong became a target of a fear-driven totalitarian machine and was forced to serve as an exemplar of punishment. His suffering and death were a calculated demonstration of how such regimes enforce obedience in the sector where total control is vital to their survival. The essence of totalitarianism lies in eroding dignity, enforcing obedience through fear, and sustaining power through institutions. Violence often stems from fear, the fear that a person who preserves conscience and humanity might reveal the fragility of a regime built on intimidation. What such systems fear most is ordinary humanity, because it allows people whom the regime seeks to isolate and turn against one another to connect, empathize, and unite, quietly undermining the foundation of rule built on terror. Viewed through this lens, Yu Menglong was not merely a victim. He embodied a quiet but real threat to the regime. His courage, dignity, and human empathy opened the door to solidarity, precisely what totalitarian power fears. His suffering and death serve as a stark reminder: even small acts of humanity, when witnessed and remembered, can challenge a system built entirely on fear and submission.